Hey, welcome to Steel Lodge. Today I'm going to be going over some really essential tips you should know for your Steam Deck and features that are really killer. Let's just jump right into it. Alright, so now we're going to go over shortcuts. The Steam Deck has quite a few of them, and I'm just going to cover my favorite ones right here. In the description below, though, I'll add a list to all of them, so you can check them out if you want to see everything the Steam Deck has to offer. So the first one here is if you press the Steam button and R1 at the same time, you'll take a screenshot. And that screenshot will just save to Steam. You can upload that and share it if you want. But if you go to your desktop mode, you can actually go to the Steam settings, like you would on a normal computer, and make it so you can save these screenshots as high-resolution files, and you can pick what folder they go into. So I actually use this for some of the icons that I use for my YouTube videos. So consider turning that on if you want to save high-resolution local versions. Now, another one is Steam button and L1. This will enable the magnifier, and you can change where this looks at on the screen, and you hold these down together. And that's nice if you're playing a game that has some small text that you need to zoom in on to be able to read it easier. So that's a nice quality of life feature. Another one that's really convenient is using the Steam and X button at the same time. This will bring up a keyboard, and unfortunately it looks like Half-Life here is not the game that I want to do this in, so let me jump into another game where this is more convenient. You can also forcibly close games, so I'm going to force close Half-Life here by hitting Steam button and B at the same time, and you just hold that down for a couple seconds, and it will close the game down. Alright, so here we are on Skyrim Anniversary Edition, and this is actually a modded version of the game that I set up. There's two different methods that I cover on my channel for how to mod Skyrim on the Steam Deck, so check that out if you're interested. But for now, we'll just go ahead and name our character, and as you can see, there's no keyboard that automatically pops up. So for games like this where it doesn't automatically pop up, press the Steam button and X at the same time, and it'll bring up the keyboard, and we can name our orc here whatever we want, and then hit enter with the right trigger, or just close down the keyboard, and your inputs will work for that. So that's nice. So if you want to switch to desktop mode from the game mode in the Steam Deck, obviously you launch into game mode by default. All you do is press the Steam button and go down to power, and then you can switch to desktop mode. There's one other way to do this, and that's just by holding the power button on the Steam Deck down for a few seconds, and then this menu will come up, and you can switch to desktop mode here. The desktop mode in the Steam Deck acts a lot like Windows 10 or Windows 11 as far as the GUI goes, so it's really easy to use if you're familiar with Windows. If you want to use a MicroSD card in the Steam Deck, it's pretty easy. To insert it on the bottom of the Steam Deck, on the bottom right of it, you can just insert it there. If you can see on my unit, it's just right about here. From there, just go to the Steam button, click on it, go to settings, and then if you go to your system here, you scroll down and look for the system settings. You'll probably have to format your microSD card before you can actually use it. For me, that's what I had to do, and I expect that's the same for a lot of people. So once you've formatted your microSD card, you can go ahead and go down to storage, and then you can click X right here to set this as the default installation for your games. For instance, if I click X here, it'll make the internal storage, my internal SSD, the default. If I do this, whatever one has the star is the default. You can also go ahead and move your games between drives, just like you would on the computer. So for instance, I have Final Fantasy X and X-2 installed to my internal SSD. If I go to the settings here and I say properties, local files, and I can move install folder, and I can just move that to the microSD card if I wanted to. Alright, so I went ahead and opened Resident Evil Revelations here, so we're going to look at the Performance tab. To bring this up, press the three dots on your Steam Deck to open up the Quick Guide. The first section here that I have pulled up is the Performance tab, so that'll be under the battery here. There's also some other stuff here, for instance this Help tab, and a Quick Settings tab where if you want to change your brightness, audio, and microphone, you can change that here. But like I mentioned, we're going to focus on this. So it'll probably be off in this basic view when you start it, and that's good for now to just explain the general performance overlay level here. So at this setting, nothing is displayed in the top left. Let me hide it now. Now nothing's displayed in the top left. If we raise this one level up, we can see our frame rate in the top left now. So this is the performance that we get in game. So if I close this, and I turn around here, our frame rate is running at a solid 60 FPS. This game's pretty easy to run, so that's not a surprise. So if I bring that back up now, I can go ahead and raise this up even higher. So now we have even more information on the top left. This will show us what percentage our GPU usage is at, and our CPU usage is at. It also shows us our battery percentage and the estimated remaining battery life that we have right now. So you can see I have 61% battery life. It's running at 16 watts right now, and I have an hour and 35 minutes left if I keep going at this state. Also, it shows you the API that's being used. Right now, right now we're using DXVK to render this game. It's using the Proton layer to render it, so that makes sense. It also shows you the FPS still, and then the 16.7 milliseconds is the frame time. That's how long it takes your GPU to render a frame out and deliver it to the screen. So every single one of these frames for 60 FPS is being rendered at 16.7 milliseconds and then delivered to the screen. Right below that, if you're not familiar, we have a frame time graph. This shows us a general consistency of our frame time, that last number I mentioned. So if we get a spike in there, that can present itself in the game as a stutter. As you see, we have some stutters going on here, but nothing major that I can notice. But if I, turn the camera or do any effects, maybe we'll see some inconsistencies. This game's easy to run, like I mentioned, but that can give you an idea of how stable your performance actually is in a game. So if you see a bunch of lines up and down in there, that means your game's probably stuttering a lot. If you can see it too, that will let you know. As it moves to the left, it'll be later in time, and the right side's basically what just happened on the screen. All right, so now if we raise this up to 3, we'll get even more information for us. This time we can see our VRAM and our RAM. And as far as I know, the VRAM and RAM pool is shared on the Steam Deck because it's an integrated GPU. So that's just one big pool of memory that the Steam Deck can allocate as it needs to. And I'm pretty sure there's 16 gigabytes. So just keep that in mind. If you have a lot of performance issues in games, maybe your VRAM and RAM usage is too high and your Steam Deck's trying to grab, assets that it doesn't have access to. And we also get here now our GPU and CPU temperatures. Right now we're running around 75 to 70 degrees Celsius for both the CPU and GPU, which is not that bad. And right now the Steam Deck's fans aren't really kicking up, so it's not that demanding. It's not pushing very hard with the percentage that we're pushing the CPU and GPU right now. So there's one level beyond this, and if we crank this up even further, we can see that we get some color coordination here now on some of the numbers. More information regarding each CPU core and thread that we have and how much it's being used. So for some games, maybe it's not optimized to use multi-core. So if you pull this up here, you'll see that one core is at like 100% usage and then the other ones are all hovering low. And maybe that's causing a frame rate cap for you in your game. We can also see the RPM that the fan is running at right here, running just under 4,000 RPM right now, and also if FSR is enabled or not. Now there's also 2 frame time graphs here. I'm not exactly sure what the bottom one is for the frame count for the app, but the information there looks pretty similar. Also in both of these views, you can see the wattage for the CPU and GPU, but in the more advanced view, you can actually see the frequency that the GPU and the CPU is running at here. Our GPU here is running not a very high frequency. And for the CPU on the Steam Deck, it honestly is kind of the component that does use a lot of power if you have it running really heavy. So keep that in mind for the future if you want to increase your battery life. Now, as we move along here, we can go to the advanced view now. So now there's some new settings that came recently with some updates. So this one lets you set per game profiles for the Steam Deck. For instance, if you wanted to set a specific profile for Resident Evil here, I could have it enabled. Then when I launch into the game, it could have custom frame rate limits and all this set. Speaking of frame rate limits, here is a frame rate limiter right here, and as I have 60 hertz set as my refresh rate for my Steam Deck, I have different multiples of 60 that can fit in there. So for 30 and 15, they divide evenly. So if I cut this down to 30 FPS right now, we can see our usage for basically everything drop down, and our battery life will go up over time as we let the Steam Deck adjust to this. So 15 and 30 divide evenly. For VSync, you want to make sure that you have an even multiple that fits in there. Otherwise, you'll get screen tearing unless you have something like G-Sync or FreeSync. But unfortunately, the Steam Deck does not have these technologies built in. Now below here, we can also limit the refresh rate of the Steam Deck. This is a really nice feature. If you didn't know, the Steam Deck recently got this added to it, and you can drop this all the way down to 40. So unfortunately, I can't drop this down from anything but 60, or my capture card will have a fit, and I can't actually capture the footage. But if I drop this down to 40 FPS, it's really nice for games that can't hit 60 FPS, or if you want to save battery life. Obviously, you can jump to any number in between here and there, but 40 is a good number because it's actually, in terms of frame delivery, right between 30 and 60 FPS. I know 45 seems like the number that's right in between them, but if you do the math, like 1 over 30, 1 over 60, and 1 over 40, 1 over 40 is right in between in terms of frame delivery. So it's a lot more responsive than 30 FPS, but also gives you some battery savings versus 60 FPS, or if you can't even hit 60 FPS, it's nice to be able to lock it down there. Now here's some other settings that we can look at. Half rate shading. This one honestly does not have the best implementation right now in my opinion. Variable rate shading is basically where your GPU will degrade certain parts of the image that it doesn't think need to be the highest quality, like the shaders of them, as far as I understand. And if I turn this on right now, you can probably see that the background there became much blurrier. I'll turn it back off rather. So you look at the texture of the brickwork in the background. I'll turn this back on, becomes much blurrier. Now, depending game to game, this is gonna be different, but honestly, overall, I haven't really seen it have a very massive effect in terms of saving power or getting me better battery life, so I'd ignore that for now. Also, I think the frame rate limit cap that I have set for the Steam Deck here is interfering with the one that's actually set in-game for Resident Evil with the VSync, and that's what's causing these little frame time spikes. So keep in mind that if you set the frame rate limit here for the Steam Deck, you might want to turn it off in your game so you don't have like VSync happening in two different places. Now we have some other settings here. Here's a thermal power limit. If you turn that on, you can set the maximum wattage you want your Steam Deck to use. For me, I don't really want to limit this right now, so I'm just going to turn that off. But if you're running a game that's super easy to run, think of like some 2D pixel art games, you can really crank that number down and get some better performance for your battery. Now here's the manual GPU clock control. We can turn this one on, and you can see that the maximum clock we can hear with our GPU is 1600. Now if you noticed in the top left, if I turn this off, our GPU actually is only hanging around 850, megahertz. But if I turn it on, we can get all the way up to 1600, but we don't need that kind of performance right now. But if you do want to kind of limit your performance with certain games, you can turn this way down or force it up if you really want to try to like overclock the GPU for some reason, but that's really going to force your Steam Deck to eat up a lot more power. It's going to be a lot louder because of that, because of the heat. So I usually leave this one off and don't mess with it too much, but it's a nice feature. So here's scaling filter. So we have a couple options here, and these affect how the game's actually going to be upscaled if you're running at a sub-native resolution. I'm going to go ahead and cut the video right here and then jump to a whole new part to get more into depth about this. So I went ahead and jumped over into Half-Life 2, and this game lets me put it into a sub-native resolution and still fill my monitor that I'm capturing on. So the Steam Deck has a resolution of 1280 by 800. So here, the game I'm running sub-native at 1024 by 576. So now we can look at some of these scaling options. So by default, let me bring up the performance tab here. This game is really easy to run, so we're probably not going to have any problems hitting absurd frame rates. As you can see, we're doing 300 FPS over here, and the game's maxed out. It's a pretty old game. But let's check out the scaling filters. So linear is going to do a pretty simple interpolation, a linear interpolation from the sub-native resolution that I have to the native resolution of the Steam Deck. So basically, it's going to use some math to calculate the pixels in between there and just do it simple and straightforward. Now here's nearest neighbor. Nearest neighbor keeps edges pretty sharp and makes it fill like pixels with harsh edges. So this is actually really good for pixel art games that run at sub-native resolution, that you still want them to retain that sharp pixel art look. And you can see here that things look pretty pixelated compared to the linear, where things look a bit blurrier. Now integer, I do not know the specifics about integer scaling, so I can't speak about it too much right now. I haven't used it a ton, really at all, to be honest with you, but you can look it up. It's another option. I'm pretty sure it makes it lock the resolution to just integers instead of decimal places when scaling things. So that way, for instance, I have a 1440p monitor here, and the Steam Deck, can do like 720p rendering. 1440p is, about double on both axes that 720p is, so that would be a 2 times, integer scaling into there. So I think that's about what that does. So here now we have FSR, which is AMD's technology. This is not the more advanced FSR 2.0 version, but this is a simpler FSR like 1.0 implementation that's available to all games on the Steam Deck, which is really nice. Now FSR, it's kind of like linear, but it has more going on. It has sharpening too, which can help things look better. So you also have this sharpness slider here. Here we have it turned all the way up, which makes things like really kind of over sharpened. If we turn this down to even like a 1, that looks much better in my opinion. But you can go anywhere in between. I kind of do stick around 2 or lower, sometimes 3, but I don't look at over sharpened look in a game. So FSR is generally better to use than linear in basically all the scenarios you can think of. And it's nice because some games you can't actually hit, 60 FPS or whatever FPS target you're going for if you run the game at the native Steam Deck resolution. But if you run it slightly sub-native resolution and then use FSR to resharpen the game to make it look nice on the Steam Deck screen, it can really give you that extra performance while actually not looking visually that different than native resolution. An example of this is for The Witcher 3, I actually had a little script I set up to set custom resolutions of the game. So I'd run it at slightly sub-native resolution and then use FSR to get the frame rate up to where I want it to be while having the game still look really nice on there. So here's a quick comparison between FSR at level 2. Just look at the wall, look at Gordon's gun here and some of the bodies on the ground, and then I'll switch over to linear. Linear looks quite a bit blurrier, and I don't think FSR honestly looks too over-sharpened. It looks a lot better than this, though, in my opinion. So, bring that back up. That looks pretty nice for being a sub-native resolution image. So that about wraps it up for the performance tab here. If you want to, you can reset things to the default, and then you can also show the performance overlay in Steam itself. I haven't really enabled this one, but I'm pretty sure this will actually just show the overlay inside of the Steam GUI, and I don't really know why you'd want to do that, so I just leave that off usually. Okay, now we're looking at controller setup for the Steam Deck for each game. So here I have Final Fantasy X and X-2 HD Remaster pulled up. This is a game I've actually been playing the most on the Steam Deck. I'm almost through 10, so it's a lot of fun. But one thing is, when you play this game, it opens up this launcher window to pick what game you want. And to interact with this, you have to use the touch screen. And on an external monitor like this mapping is actually not very accurate to where you'd think it'd be. And I actually just prefer to use the trackpads. Now, by default, the trackpads are not set up here. So if you press the Steam button and then go to View Game Details, you can go over to the controller here, and for each game, you can set up custom layouts. So if we go to Edit Layout, I've already set mine up, and then go down to Trackpads, you can set up what each of your trackpads does. Now for me, I like to make my right trackpad the mouse, so I've done this already, but by default, it would be none. So you can set this to be whatever you want. I set this to be as mouse, and then I make the click on it by touching it and clicking it in, be the left mouse click, so I can confirm things in Windows. And this is really nice too for games that have launchers like this and games where the inventory management system is clearly built for a mouse instead of using a controller. So for here, I'll just use the trackpad and click on Final Fantasy X because that's what I've been playing, and it'll launch right into the game. Now there's a couple other reasons why I picked this game. There's mappings that are only on a keyboard and are not on a controller by default for this game. One is when you press the escape button, it brings up this menu. And as far as I can tell, there's no button that's regularly mapped on a controller that actually brings this menu up, which is pretty nice. You can do things like quit the game. There's special features in here too. And one of those special features is actually the fast forward feature. As you can see up there, I have turbo 2 times and 4 times enabled. And this can make just running through certain parts of the game like this desert a lot faster and easier to do than having to slog through it. And like I mentioned, there's no mapping for these by default on a controller. So what I went ahead and did is I went up and pressed my Steam button here, and I just went to View Game Details again, Controller Settings, and then I edited the layout. You can also do it right here. And these are the 4 buttons that are on the back of the Steam Deck, right where your fingers would rest. So I went and made L5 Escape and R5 F1, because that's the binding for fast forward. And that's what's the nice thing about the Steam Deck is you can make it gamepad bindings, you can make it mouse bindings, keyboard bindings, numpad, anything you really want. I think you might be able to record a macro in here if you wanted to. Even some of the other features. Let me look here. Yeah, some of the system stuff. You can make the magnifier enable. These are mappings that you would have for these shortcuts, but you can just map them to one button presses instead, which is really nice. So the Steam Deck really allows you to customize basically any game to how you want it to play with the controller, which is such a big benefit to something like the Switch, where some games only have one controller mapping and you can't customize it at all. Here you have full control, even if the game doesn't have it in its menu by default. Alright, so this last one's actually about charging your Steam Deck. So the charger that comes with the Steam Deck provides enough wattage for the Steam Deck to play a game that's demanding and still charge it at the same time, and it'll charge the Steam Deck pretty quick. So if you can see here, I've got the Steam Deck plugged in, and in the top right, there's the little battery icon with the Thunderbolt in it, and nothing popped up when I plugged it in. It just started charging and was good to go. But I've also got this other USB-C cable right here laying on my desk. This one's the one I use to charge phones. and I think it's like 18 watt. I think the one that comes with the Steam Deck is 45 watt. So this one provides a lot less wattage. And if I plug this into the Steam Deck, you can see that I get this pop-up right here where it says slow charger. If I play a game, it might discharge the Steam Deck while I am actually playing it still, even though it's plugged in. And this is actually going to charge the Steam Deck a lot slower too. So just keep that in mind if you're picking up a new charger for the wall. Check the wattage. Anything around 45 watts or higher should be good for the Steam Deck to keep it powered and playing your games at the same time. Thanks for watching this video. If you like it, check out the channel. I have a bunch more Steam Deck videos that are coming out and on the channel already. Have a good one, everybody.